Symbolic History Through Sight and Sound, 8, Gothic Prelude, Lux Nova. The waking of a culture shares with spring and dawn this mystery. First buds seem most jewelled, brightest songs greet the earliest rays. Letten is come with luve to tune, with blossman and with bridis rune, that all this blisse bringeth. Almost incredible, the new light with which Gothic love opens in the ascetic dusk, gracing the beauty of earth with sacred sanction. So the lilting poignance of a 1235 motet, Ave Maria, with this detail and another from Mont Saint-Michel, and 3 from Reims. But the waking had begun by the year 1000, 2.5 crucial centuries before Reims' portal. From its Gothic height, this prelude must look back, where Romanesque vaults toward Gothic out of the Dark Age ground. As the cathedrals soar from earlier crypts as dark as holy, or the rhymed tropes embellish scripture, as the organa and motets of Ars Antiqua flow from plain song. So the 11th century nave of Mont Saint-Michel lightens to a late Gothic choir, time of Ockeghem. A favoured blend, as at Aachen, Tournai, Le Mans.
Da pace
We have seen Christianity in the crumbling of pagan power, rear in the grave antinomies of eternal faith and world abandonment. At first the poles were draped in the dissolving arts of classical leisure. But as as they move north, a symbolic cross to the German tribes, while these pour southward over Rome, the residual suavities of space and consciousness are stripped away, leaving the poles burning as in void, with the abstract inconsequence of timeless vision. And the first strands of the Western temporal fabric stretch over the rift, a pre-Gothic sharpness of joy and pain, concentrating into spirit the apocalyptic enigma where they are born. Or the metaphor of poles may be extended to the historical weaving. Then the cross of stripped faith and earthly negation becomes a temporal base for the Western curve, the Gothic birth, a many-phased unfolding from that somber ground, such the rearing of Notre Dame and Perotin. But the ground is ideal, an assumed limit of the actual field. What is its art locus? Not the early Christian and Byzantine, not this 6th century Madonna from Sinai, with its troubled Greek shadowings of sensuous personality. The negation had begun there, but it had not run its course. The stripping to the bare abstract was the Dark Age drift of Christendom everywhere. Here we pick it up from 10th century Armenia, still in precursive contact with the West, though soon to fall to the Sultan. The Book of Kells exhibits the general affinity, and even specific features derived from earlier Coptic and Armenian contacts. Through that old world ascetic hardening, Celtic wonder looks out, a child's eyes through a mask of age. How near is the Kells flowering to the Dark Age ground? The Irish were faithful anyway to linear abstraction. The Book of Kells a summit among such manuscripts produced over more than 300 years. By 1000, after the Viking raids and the exodus of scholars, representation, as in this Southampton Psalter, David and Goliath, seems flattened to the barest outlines of penmanship. What Clay and the 20th century would revive in post-Freudian psyche art. But is that inverted Goliath lying on the Dark Age ground? Carolingian manuscripts, struggling for space in spacelessness, hardly admit of so comical a grounding, nor the poems of mondo-pessimism and God-hope. Alcuin's epitaph, yearning I followed the delights of the world, ashes and dust now, delicias mundi, nunc sinis et pulvis, nor the Anglo-Saxon wanderer's vanity of vanities, all is labour and loss in this lower world. Nor from Cynewulf's Christ, late 8th century, suave on lagu floda, windigo holmas, ophodeop gelad. A waste of surges we sail across in this wavering world, over wind-swept tracts of open sea, the Son of God guides us. As the dialectic of poles implies, the clearest expressions of that winter ground do not come from the broken trough, but as the forces rally that would lift off from it, as in the pre-conquest schools of Winchester and Ely, a vitality, alien as something from China, opens in the calligraphic symbol world. The final outpost of a transition where lean, backward-looking presages the birth to follow is the Germany of the Artaud's. There Notker and Wipo were writing the sequences our historical discs leave historical. There the Saxon nun Hroswitha, about 980, created out of faith and stark Latin a sacred drama, blending comic and tragic, though the mystery plays it anticipates would grow not from such learned imitation, but from the life of the mass. Consider a plot. Callimachus has to wife the saintly Drusiana. To avoid his legitimate caress, that monastic chastity Hegel would despise, she receives death by prayer, is protected by a divine serpent, revived by the Apostle John, converts old Callimachus, and banishes a vulgar servant to hell. As in Artonian illumination, mind, action, and world begin and end in miracle. Nothing stoops to the physical. Every cause reverts to first cause. That the pagan vanity of drama can be revived in piety is one of the life-giving reversals by which the profane and temporal spring in the timeless enclosure of creed. So, at the end of the Dark Ages, we have seen outlawed reason, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, prove, in Anselm, the Tertullian impossibility of God's incarnation. For the deified Augustus' first-century cameo to win the center of the 10th century cross of Lothair reflects in its most dramatic form the same about-face by which Christian withdrawal changes to Christian attack. It began with Constantine, but the Dark Age life of paradox, from Charlemagne's Saracen struggle to the First Crusade, made it the automatic stance of warrior Christianity. Thus Fulcher of Chartres describes the 1099 fall of Jerusalem, also hailed in music. The Franks entered the city magnificently at the noonday hour on Friday, the day of the week when Christ redeemed the whole world on the cross. Nowhere was there a place where the Saracens could escape the swordsman. Within Solomon's temple, about 10,000 were beheaded. If you had been there, your feet would have been stained up to the ankles with the blood of the slain. They did not spare the women and children. Within a faith once of radical peace and estranged from empire, what Vico calls the holy wars of heroic peoples have been reinstated. The mode of this accomplishment is the medieval mode of faith symbol. Augustus here is both the Prince of Peace and his secular image. So Arthur and the peers of France are baptized. The Celtic Graal becomes the cup of redemption. The horn of Bran, coarse, by a Frankish pun, the wafer of Corpus Christi, even as bread and wine are body and blood. So the eagle-shaped M in Dante raises Roman monarchy to the stars. Under the cult of the timeless and spaceless, what has occurred? Europe was rising like Mont Saint-Michel out of the mist. The war horse had been bred for chivalry, the mold-board plough invented for the forest soil. The three-field crop system was boosting food production. For the destroyed life trade of the Mediterranean, the road and river trade of Europe had seeded the medieval towns. The very principle of disruption, empire into warlike fiefs, shapes the feudal ties of modern kingdoms. The Dark Age terrors of war and passion, Brunhilde, Deirdre, Hallgarda, turn to chivalric devotion, while the Church, vitiated and corrupted through the time of troubles, begins with Cluny 910, its passionate regeneration. Even in statements of the ascetic ground, Peter Damiati, 11th century, nothing remains but the love of God and mortification of yourselves. We forget that the key words, love and self, are subtly changing. My wretched heart, his Yeatsian cry, which will not lose the memory of a form seen but once. So Marcabru's 1137 lament becomes a chivalric call. Everywhere the earthly is entrained in the heavenly quest. Pope Urban prompts to the First Crusade, not merely for the glory of God and his kingdom. This land is too narrow for your population. Jerusalem is a land fruitful above all others. To which the cry of acceptance was, Dieu li vole. From that crusading century, the symptom of new life which still dominates the landscape is a wave of first Romanesque churches in those rising centers of trade and prosperity. If the Kaiser domes of the Ottonian Rhine and Mosel hear the west front of the Roman Basilica of Trier, with a Goliard chant, initiate the surge in a form as weightily archaic as the organization of the empire, it is at once caught up or independently advanced in northern Italy and France. 1063, and the free commune of Pisa begins an arcaded marble basilica of Proto-Renaissance harmony. Though if vault had been grappled with, as in the driven north, this first benign beauty of our culture could hardly have afforded such purity and ease. In the paucity of early organa and plainness of their reconstruction, it is of interest that the first Italian polyphony, Regi Regum Gloriosa, 11th century Lucca manuscript, blends smooth plain-song melodies in perfect intervals against the more dissonant risks of French organon.
Regi Regum Glorioso, Petrus et Paulus sedulo, assistant in vallatio, superni regis jubilo, benedicamus Domino.
At the same time in Venice, queen of the Adriatic and Eastern trade, the art lingering of Constantinople found hospitable soil and leafed out in the breathtaking domes of St. Mark's, 1069 to 74, though beneath the outward exhalation brood gold mosaic vaults, decorated through centuries, but still symbolic enclosures of jewels burning in the Dark Age gloom. Was the chant as Byzantine as the art? Or had the diaphony of French-Italian Guido already reared the poles of organum? Parallel. And contrary.
Sexta hora sedit super puteum.
To the south, the impoverished heart of what had been imperial Rome showed no such progress.
Laudate Dominum omnes gentes, laudate omnes populi.
It must have seemed strange to the independent north that the papal tail should so determinedly wag the dog, especially when the Tuscan Hildebrand, elected pope in 1073, pushed ahead with church reform in the spirit of Cluny, outlawing the imperial practice of lay investiture. against the archaic Roman manner of this little Capua church.
Face ne fas ambulant, pene passo pari, prodigus non credibit, vitium avari, virtu temperantia.
How vastly the Mainzer dome, 11th century at core, though a conglomerate from the 10th to the 19th, sprawls over the Rhine. With such gangling pride, Henry IV must have gathered his appointed bishops to answer Gregory VII's claim that the Roman Church had never erred, nor would err to all eternity, that it was in the apostolic power to depose emperors, and that Henry should obey the mandate of God. The answer, Henry, king, by the holy ordination of God, to Hildebrand, not pope, but false monk. By wiles thou hast achieved money, by money favor, by the sword the throne of peace, and from the throne of peace thou hast disturbed peace. Thou, therefore, damned by this curse, relinquish the apostolic chair which thou hast usurped. I, Henry, king, by the grace of God, together with all our bishops, say thus unto thee, descend, descend, and be damned throughout the ages. But Hildebrand was linked all over Europe with the rising tide of Catholic power, from Santiago through Magister Albertus Paris as far as Normandy, where Duke William and his churchmen were then creating the most pregnant of Romanesque styles, which in the superimposed heights of his own monastery at Caen already looks to Gothic. The papal ban was no negligible weapon. Henry's submission at Canossa in the snowy winter of 1077, Gregory himself describes. And there, having laid aside all the belongings of royalty, wretchedly, with bare feet and clad in wool, he continued for 3 days to stand before the gate of the castle. Nor did he desist from imploring with many tears the aid and consolation of the apostolic mercy, until he had moved all those who were present there to pity and depth of compassion. Today, the Apennine castle of Canossa is a ruin as abandoned as the papal dream of Europe under spiritual sway. Though the feud went on, even to Henry's taking Rome in 1084, and the Norman Sicilian Guiscards recovering it for the Pope, but with such rape and misconduct that Gregory was driven into exile by the outraged Romans. As in all deep conflicts of history, progress banked on both sides, the emerging national states and the Catholic synthesis of Europe, while in thought and the arts, France confirmed itself as the ordering center. The Chanson de Roland, against the looser German epics, reveals the formative discipline of the Norman French. The Bayeux Tapestry, record of the conquest of England, has such clean force and drama within the iconographic stripping of all figures, as description in the Roland is cut to a functional core. Roland est pros, et Oliver est sage. Roland is brave, and Oliver is wise. And are we not told by Malmesbury and Wace how the Dukes Jongleur, Taillefer, or Tulliver joined battle at Hastings, chanting the Cantilena Rolandi? Emotion, pathos, everything personal is held here in the severity of automatic faith, which dominates and transforms until the horn of Roland sounds through the Pyrenees like the trumpet of doom. Roland feels that his time is no more. He is on a steep hill that looks toward Spain. He has held up his right glove to God. The angels of heaven come down to him. Ahoy! Angles del ciel y descendent a lui. Ahoy! With the Norman conquest, and even just before that mighty style, here Matilda's Church of the Trinity in Caen spreads over England, so that most of the cathedrals of the island are built round or carved out of a great Norman core, often begun within 10 years of the conquest. Thus, at Winchester, longest cathedral in Europe, the solemn proportions of the 1079 to 93 nave must be felt through a Gothic surface of the time of Chaucer. The verticals, the Lierne vault, stretch the low solidity of structure, lightened by modest buttresses and the pointing of windows once round-arched. Yet all that richness speaks what it came from and must have been. Again, the Abbey of Matilda, wife of the Conqueror. There are always attempts to differentiate Romanesque from Gothic, as Frankel's additive against divisive. Still, this vaulted stone already contains the other future, as centuries of polyphony would unfold from this early organum. And what could more beautifully show the sweep of Romanesque Gothic than to move from Matilda's Caen to the nave of Winchester, melodized and harmonized hockets on that ground. Here, where the poise of Norman, to be continued through the quieter Gothic of England, awaits the filling in of Renaissance, we are struck by the continuity of the Western rebirth, the speed with which it found its expressive forms. Another of those early polyphonies, this from Chartres, before 1100, an Alleluia, organum joined with plain song, will let us move from the pre-Romanesque of southern France, 1080 Saint-Savin, through William the Conqueror's own church in Caen, begun in 1063, piers as alternately through Romanesque and early Gothic, replacing columns, the dialectic of vertical and lateral, like the scholastic vaulting of yes and no, grandly anticipated. To English Norman, columned again in Tewkesbury, early 12th century, later windows glimpsed through the dusk. Though we would need more music than we have, records recovered from the still vibrating molecules of those church walls, to distinguish the musical stages of Romanesque. Tewkesbury with the aisled solemnity of Egyptian Karnak, and outside the long nave roof and tremendous tower of Norman. How much French history was enacted north of the Channel, the Anglo-Norman scribe of the Roland, Anselm, Archbishop of Canterbury, Marie de France, also of England, the play of Adam, chief relic of 12th century drama. Back to France, Vézelay, 1132 to 40, and now available music admits of a style distinction. At the very time when the upward reach of Gothic begins in art and soul, that angel clarity of fierce mystic love, in which so many great men join, theologian lover Abelard, builder politician Suger, mystic Hugh of Saint Victor, and even their puritanical censor Bernard of Clairvaux, Gregorian stretches out to a tenor, Latin tenere, to hold, over which new melodies slide in melismatic organum. With the Vézelay portal and Gislebertus, Christ and the Magdalene, here the brief recorded section of a Benedicamus Domino of the St. Martial School at Limoges, the first beautiful performance of polyphony. Here is Hugh of Saint Victor, early 12th century, in praise of love, De Laude Caritatis. You have great power, O love. You alone could draw God down from heaven to earth. How strong is your bond with which even God could be bound. You brought him bound with your bonds. You brought him wounded with your arrows. You wounded him who was invulnerable. You bound him who was invincible. You drew him who was immovable. The eternal you made mortal. O love, how great is your victory. Set that celebration of love's paradox against its ultimate source. Socrates, taught by Diotima in the Symposium, of which this Hellenistic relief survives, where Plato invokes Eros just to avoid the paradox of the divine and earthly. What then is love? He is a great spirit, the mediator who spans the chasm which divides the divine and the mortal. For God mingles not with man, but through love all the intercourse and converse of God with man, whether awake or asleep, is carried on. The eternal you made mortal. O love, how great is your victory! What lucent contradictions have opened stained glass windows in the dark, since the Socratic search for rationality. In southern France, and soon after in the north, the love of woman, its poetry and music, are caught up in the same mystical fervor. Perhaps the best-known troubadour song is that high chivalric one by Bernard de Ventadorn of the 12th century, the lover's envy when he sees the lark, as she beats her wings with delight against the sun, lose herself and fall in the sweetness that goes to her heart. Canve la lautzetta mover, de joie sas alas contra el rai, que s'oblith es laissa chasser, per la douceur qu'al cor li vai. In the dearth of secular art, we hear it with the Moissac prophet holding a scroll, both pierced by timeless ecstasy. The improvised accompaniments are lost, and efforts by later groups, Binkley and so forth, to supply them, make us treasure the solo refinements of Max Miley, or hear Mertens of the Brussels Pro Musica Antiqua.
Carve la rosetta mover de joy sazon les oblides, les chaser, per la douceur qu'al cor li vaille. Ai, tan grand
In Troubadour Love, in the burning love of Mary, second Eve, a new species of joy possesses Europe.
Meravilos ai car de se, lo cor de desirer non
As if mutation had produced a flower of unknown grace and fragrance, we see as recognizably as snowdrops spread through a forest the lyric fire, Gislebertus Eve in the snake vines, lighten from Provence over Burgundy and France to England, Germany, and to the Italy of the sweet new style. For early 12th century France, Abelard and Eloise draw both loves to a flaming core. That the man, condemned by St. Bernard for logic and rationality, this man has no mind to believe what his reason has not previously argued, would later stand for medieval passion, sacred and profane, hints at the sheer ambivalence of that intellectual fire. A likely conjecture that the supreme Latin love poem of the time, the Dum Diane Vitrea, in its richness and freedom, may be one Abelard sang for Eloise, and heard sung after him by admiring scholars. From it we cull 3 phrases. When the gleaming lamp of Diana is kindled, late at the rosy light of her brother, and west winds bearing fragrance wander the ether ways of heaven, Dum Diane Vitrea sero lampas oritur, et a fratris rosea luce dum sucenditur, dulcis aura zephiri spirans omnes aeteri. The sounds of water on pure sand, and of a mill-wheel turning round, steal oblivious eyes from the light. Murmurari vorum per arenas puras, circularis ambitus molendinorum, qui furantur somno lumen oculorum. Sweet is the passage from love into sleep, but sweeter the waking from sleep to love. Hey quam felix transitus amoris ad soporem, sed suavior regressus soporis ad amorem. From the Gerocroits at the close of the Dark Ages, identification with the human Saviour matures to this Lavaudieu head of 1135. And again it is Abelard who, in his epical poem on Good Friday, at the condemned close of his own life, voiced the personal theory of atonement, which, as Waddell says, his century branded as heresy, and which is the beginning of modern theology. Alone to sacrifice thou goest, Lord, solus ad victimam procedis, Domine. From northern Spain at the same time, which shares with France the passions of pre-Gothic, such human participation melts with tenderness the archaic figures of the Silos reliefs. As with Abelard, the sin which required Christ's sacrifice is taken up, deeply and personally ours. Nostra sunt, Domine, nostra sunt crimina. That spirit is confirmed in the 12th century Passion windows of Le Mans, this Poitiers, then Chartres. Why must thou suffer torture for our sin? Abelard's answer is to fast as with Christ in the grave. Heavy with weeping may the 3 days pass to win the laughter of thine Easter day. So Dante would himself descend on Good Friday and rise the 3rd day. We stand here at the source not only of Protestant theology, but of the realistic incarnations of Christian art, the impersonation of the Easter trope which engendered Western drama. Quem queritis in sepulchro, O Christiculae? Whom do you seek in the sepulchre, O women of Christ? Jesum Nazarenum crucifixum, Jesus of Nazareth crucified. Non est hic, surrexit, ite nunciate. He is not here. Go and announce that the Lord has risen. That earliest St. Gall example is of the time of the Gerocroits, but by the 12th century the sacred play has developed as startlingly as, in this other 1140 relief from Silos, the burial of Christ indicates its entire realistic bent and pre-Renaissance soul. As in Abelard, the inward change has been made. It would take centuries to elaborate the techniques of the earthly. But this martyred Jesus, the mourning Marys, the sleeping gods below, stand on the threshold of the 1400 humanization which heralds the Renaissance, the Norwich School resurrection, say, toward which the arrow of Romanesque awareness is drawn. How many strands of the Western soul are already spun into the fabric of the time of Abelard? In that fabric, indeed, forces opposed become the warp and woof of one awakening. Even Bernard of Clairvaux, 1090 to 1153, faith-centered watchdog against progress, was so borne on the individual and passionate tide that he seems a source of reformation with the Christ-imitating piety of its odds. Small wonder he was already at odds with Abelard, most daring precursor of Renaissance. Reformation and Renaissance, a warring identity, joined in the larger empowering of man and world. Though Reformation's drive toward renewed Christianity would counter the classical claims of reason and taste. St. Bernard not only hunts down what he calls heresy, Abelard, Arnold of Brescia, William of Conches, and the rest. He attacks the now wealthy monasteries of Cluny for the size and extravagance of their churches, then as richly colored and jeweled as they are still recognizably carved. What profit is there in those ridiculous monsters, that deformed comeliness, that comely deformity, those half men and fighting knights, those hunters winding their horns? Doth not the root of all this lie in covetousness, which is idolatry? At the sight of these marvelous vanities, men are more kindled to offer gifts than to pray. Thus wealth is drawn up by ropes of wealth. Thus money bringeth money. Yet, as from Abelard, not only the heretical, but the church-sustaining energies of the next generation were to spring, so in the great series of portals, beginning about 1100 to 1120, with Moissac, and here Autun, and culminating after 1140 in the royal portal of Chartres, we experience a logos powerful in ordering the divine, an achievement impossible without a daring that continually walked the knife-edge of heresy being, in Abelard's case, an advance too rapid or too proud along the road his followers would make orthodox. Right that Geoffrey, Bishop of Chartres, and of its Platonic school, just before the 1130 fire, occasioned much of the present West Front, should defend Abelard at Soissons, 1121, since in this divine geometry, heaven-scaling reason speaks with most oracular organ. It was in the brilliance of his youth that Abelard opened dialectic theology with the sic et non, yes and no, for 157 questions crucial to the faith, a columned array of quotations from the Bible, the Fathers, the pagan classics, affirming and denying, a handbook of contradictions. The prologue states what is almost Heidegger's basic tuning, Stimmung, of Western thought, Cartesian certainty mediated by question. For by doubt, says Abelard, we come to inquiry, and by inquiry we arrive at the truth. This was the book which Peter Lombard later called his breviary, and from which Aquinas would draw his method of objection and reply. though Abelard was even more blamed for his lectures and tract about 1120 on the divine unity and Trinity. In the story of My Calamities, he tells of writing it for his scholars, who wanted to know rather what could be understood than what could be stated, nor could anything be believed unless it could first be understood. Bernard could hardly ignore such a reversal of Augustine's "believe that you may understand, crede ut intelligas." He bestirred himself before the second trial at Sens, 1140. Peter Abelard is trying to make void the merit of Christian faith when he deems himself able by human reason to comprehend God altogether. He ascends to the heavens and descends even to the abyss. Nothing may hide from him. Not content to see things through a glass darkly, he must behold all things face to face. The church builders had it better. They were not tried for heresy, despite their daring or Bernard's disapproval, though the geometric analysis of the west front of Chartres, revealing the three superimposed modules and harmonies of the 1145 and 1194 constructions with the 15th century taller spire, leaves no doubt how far those architects trusted Whitehead's unbridled reason of the Middle Ages in proclaiming the divine. That formulation of the Trinity, which Bernard called heretical, he savours of Arius when he speaks of the Trinity. The faith of the righteous believes, it does not dispute, is most briefly and beautifully expressed in the close of Abelard's hymn for Saturday Vespers, O quanta qualia sunt illa sabata. With what measured glory the logic of God becomes the flesh of the poem in the untranslatable mastery of Latin syntax. To the Lord of forever, praise evermore, from whom all, by whom all, in whom all are, from whom are Father is, by whom are Son, in whom are Spirit, of Father, Son, one. Perenni Domino, perpes sit gloria, ex quo sunt, perquem sunt, in quo sunt omnia. Ex quo sunt, pater est, perquem sunt, filius, in quo sunt, patris et filii spiritus. To that intellectual precision, apparent even in translation, Bernard's hymn, Jesu dulcis memoria, within the same style horizon, is diametrically opposed.
Jesu dulcis memoria, transfera godis claudia, sesu temele damnia, eius dulcis presentia.
In this puzzling saint, the old dilemma of faith crops out, selfless humility and dogmatic pride. Arnold of Brescia, whom Bernard had thrown out of France, accused him, John of Salisbury reports, of being a pursuer of vain glory, one who envied all who were not of his own school. Yet the hymn shows simple piety and childlike faith. So childlike indeed that it evaporates in translation, leaving the obvious sentiments of later religion. It begins, Jesu dulcis memoria, dans vera cordi gaudia, sed super me let omnia, eius dulcis presentia. Jesus, sweet to recall, the heart's joy in essence, more than honey and all, the sweetness of your presence. Bernard's key word, faith, is also crucially changing. Like some 12th century Madonnas, filled with the sensuous actualizations of person, as if his Christ were to be apprehended by taste, while the melody, against modal Gregorian, moves like a Protestant hymn by harmonic chords.
Sit nostra in te gloria, per contra semper secula.
great Suger, regent of France and abbot of Saint-Denis, north of Paris, provides a link between Abelard, whom he defended, and Bernard, by whom he was stirred. In 1140 to 44, about the time melismatic organum joined with discant, he had his church enlarged, windowed, and triple portaled, an act which, as much as any, turned Romanesque into Gothic. Though most of that Saint-Denis has been rebuilt or defaced, this ambulatory, with Suger's account of the building, edited and translated by Panofsky, heralds a new mysticism of Gothic incorporation, an anagogical ascent by which the earthly is symbolically elevated to the spiritual and becomes a kind of sacrament. It is hard, in any period, to call one man of the past and another of the future. Bernard's backward-looking inspires another future of penitential reform. The church is resplendent in her walls, beggarly in her poor. She clothes her stones in gold and leaves her sons naked. But we, who for the sake of Christ have deemed as dung whatever shines with beauty, enchants the ear, delights through fragrance, flatters the taste, pleases the touch, whose devotion, I ask, do we intend to incite by means of these very things? Indeed, the monumental pre-Gothic bareness of Bernard's own church at Clairvaux seems to have exerted the sort of revolutionary impact Bernard himself did. That church is mostly destroyed, but the shadowy, vast Basilica of Reims, not the cathedral, but this older church, 11th and 12th centuries, may suggest the type. It was Bernard's passionate rephrasing of the Dark Age question, which Suger's church, here a chapel of the ambulatory, was made to answer. And not only his church, but a theology derived by way of Irish-born John Scotus from the pseudo-Areopagite Syrian about 500, viewing all process as an ascent in which the material and sensory is drawn up and receives the radiance of the divine, so the lilt of troubadour love in the sacred organum of Leonin. Here is a passage from Suger, which becomes a jeweled window, itself lighting 100 and more years of the mystical fabric of Gothic. Up to the height of Reims, the height of Perotin. When in the beauty of the house of God, the loveliness of the many-colored gems has called me away from external cares, I see myself dwelling, as it were, in some strange region of the universe, which neither exists entirely in the slime of earth, nor entirely in the purity of heaven, and that by the grace of God I can be transported from this inferior to that higher world in an anagogical manner. There is the insight behind centuries of Gothic incorporation, from Chartres through the Divine Comedy to the 15th century symbolic sanctities of here and now. This Dufay, with Van Eyck's Madonna in a church, where, as Panofsky has noted, the light that seems so actual falls from the north, as on Dante's earthly paradise. On the gilded doors, which by his analogy open, like this portal of Chartres, to heaven, Suger inscribed a Latin poem in which repetition takes the place of rhyme. For the splendor of the church that has fostered and exalted him, Suger has labored for the splendor of the church. Bright is the noble work, but being nobly bright, the work should brighten the minds, that they may travel through the true lights to the true light, where Christ is the true door. In what manner it in here, in this world, the golden door defines, the dull mind rises to truth through that which is material, raised from prior submersion by the sight of this light. Mens hebes ad verum per materialia surgit, et demersa prius hac visa luce resurgit. On the windowed enlargement of the upper choir, a model for Notre Dame and so many to follow, though it is the ambulatory that remains, another poem was inscribed. Bright is that which is brightly coupled with the bright, and bright the noble edifice, pervaded by the new light. Such is Suger's Lux Nova, the sacramental light of Gothic. What ingenuities of structure that light required, any early Gothic apse here Mantes, near Paris, second half of the 12th century, will remind us of. From the first groining and ribbing of vaults, the aisles of Bernay Abbey, Norman, 1017, the crossing of Sainte-Foy, Conques, 1039 and after, as in music from the principle of simultaneously moving voices, a chain leads as by necessity to the dialectic triumph of Gothic. To open his windows, Suger reduced the walls to buttresses, though he did not make them fly. But within 10 years, at Noyon, that step was taken, to be followed at once in the churches being built at Sens, Laon, and not long after in England at Canterbury. The boldest early application was at Notre Dame in Paris, 1162 to 82. In music it was Léonin, master there through that time, who perfected the sustained tone style, combining it with powerfully driven rhythmic passages of note against note, or of tenor note against a triple in the organal voice. Here his Deum Time, sung by Tiner. The prerequisite for those soaring polyphonies was what we take for granted, though it had then to be painfully evolved, a system of time notation that would blend independent voices. It is the crisscrossing of perfect or triple rhythm that gives the music its stripped energy. It is the sustained tone melting of melody over a held ground, which complements that force with a shifting devotional tenderness of incomparable poignance. While the mystical turning from the vanity of earth to the eternal is attested by the bare fifth harmony. In the world of enlightened hope, of Gainsborough, Wright, Haydn, Jane Austen, dissonance is a passing trial, which resolves into the triadic chord of homecoming to the valid earth. But in Gothic, those triads of the heart are passing tones, dissonances of wish, and what they resolve into is the transhumanity of perfect intervals. So, in Saint Modeste at Chartres, left, the loves and moods affirmed by our major and minor hang unvalidated, as over an eternity of pure fifth octave unison. Such formal exclusion of the chords of joy and tears, in which Gainsborough's Mrs. Sheridan Wright has her being, might seem of the Dark Age ground, but their actual appearance, floating in the mystery of denial, tokens the shadowy first smile with which Gothic love lightens the ascetic pre-dawn. No piece so voices that suspension as Leonin's organum on Judea et Jerusalem. This opening duplum in the lower or tenor voice stretches out those three words with their notes as heard in the plain song. We are in the fourth mode, whose tonic is the closing E. The dominant is A, to which the tenor rises once at the climax of the discant section. Discant denotes the bar-by-bar treatment marked in yellow. Sustained tone, or vel purum, bespeaks the melismatic melting over held tones, into which the discant also returns at the close. The tension between the life of earth, which was to shape tonal harmony, and the earthless center, is enacted between the Gregorian tonic E and the F with which the chant opens. For no sooner does the organizing voice move from F above than the entire claim of sensuous F major appears, dreamed over the mystic void, as in four haunting variations of the B-flat phrase marked in red, the desired smile of Guinevere. In that emergence of romance, the repeated rise to the sacred tonic E, marked in blue, a seventh over the earth ground F, sharpens a spirit cry. Which way do we move? The Judea close affirms temporal F. With the Jerusalem phrase, the flat is withdrawn. The penultimate search over F avoids B. Still hungry for F, we are led toward dissonant E, our sister, the death of the body. But the plain song tenor drops to its E close. How strangely earth's climb completes itself in the modal octave of mystery, the timeless center of creed. Let us hear, first with the score, the tender Cape performance. And now, once more, with details from Soissons and Chartres, the perfection of the new light. Such keenness of discovery within the veneration of sacred authority is visibly attested by those dual constructions, as Mont Saint-Michel earlier and here Le Mans, where a Gothic choir launches itself from the round archings of a Romanesque nave. And in music, too, the Leonin two-part, the huge Perotin three- and four-part organa expand their resources in the ritual embrace of plain song. No correlation of one living polarity with another presents a true match. Romanesque is not, as popularly conceived, quite cognate with plainsong, nor polyphony with Gothic, since the new Romanesque already embodies, with note-for-note organum, the principles from which Gothic would spring. But to the extent that Christendom, with its patristic reverence, continually shapes contrasts of new and old, a Perotin quadruplum, here from the Della viderunt omnes, may accompany the Gothic east end of Le Mans, as it springs from the lower containment of the nave. Here, even in the Gothic choir, the supporting columns preserve the stability of Romanesque, as the quadruplum not only follows, but itself rests on plain song. Though with the tour de force of Le Mans choir, we should play the liveliest recorded quadruplum attributed to Perotin, a motet of victory over death, Mors, sung after Devan's death by his masterly syncopators.
Rambo,
il curriculum, inanito, tremoratio, qual corpusculo disseminato, et facendo d'interacolo, launis angula, reviamulo, nos gladio, et sentito, estas nato, vitam vestito, os ocapulo, discursus perdito, Christe scudo,
In this return to High Gothic, the style we compared at the beginning to dawn, it may seem that we have misapplied the metaphor, since in the display of Lament choir we are already in the blaze of Gothic sun, from which soul may well long back to the mystical glimmer of true dawn, as from these canny rhythms to the shifting duplum vel purum of Leonin. Back where the kings and queens of Judah smile from the columnar distance of Chartres. The road there is of Grail romance, Chrétien's Knight of the Cart, where Lancelot crosses the bridge of a single sword to rescue Guinevere, always such sacred resonances from the land from which no stranger returns. Those Arthurian knights inhabit the anagogical dream before the codification of space, time, and cause, why, when, and where, sapped the life of chivalry. There men swim in telepathic mystery. Lancelot rides to the queen's rescue before he could have learned of her capture. He mounts the shameful cart on the blind promise of news, a disgrace of which everyone thereafter is aware, even the queen in the other country, who blames him not for mounting, but for the converse love fault of a moment's hesitation. With how spectral a smile the lover in that realm gazes from a castle window at the glimpsed procession of the queen, her captor, and the wounded Kay. And early at the dawning hour, the gentle lady of the tower called for the sacrament of Mass, and waked the knights, and bid them dress. And when the Mass was sung and said, the one knight sat with pensive head, he who had ridden in the cart, at a little window just apart, and looked into the open land. To the other window near at hand the maiden came, and as she stood, my Lord Gawain with her abode, and spoke with her a word or two. But what they spoke I do not know, their private words I cannot tell. But as they leaned on the window-sill, along the fields by a river clear, they saw one carried in a bier. It was a wounded knight who was borne, and by his side to weep and mourn 3 maidens walked in sorrow strong. After the bier there followed along a company, and at their head a proud knight rode in arms, and led a lady by the bridle rein. And that knight saw it was the queen. At the high window still he stood, and followed her as long as he could, with eager eyes and with delight, until she had passed out of his sight. And when he saw that she was gone, he thought at once to throw him down, and break his body on the stones. As in the enigmatic smile of the Chartres angel of the sundial, childish simplicity here is of a piece with magic skill. Such the sustained tone melting through love's discords into the octave or fifth. Such the recovered paradise in the Easter sequence by Abelard's successor, Adam de Saint-Victor, the Paradisi Gaudium, which is also the springtime of earth. Coelum fit serenius, et mare tranquillius, spirat aura levius, valles nostra floruit. The heavens quiet be, and tranquil is the sea. The winds blow tenderly, the vales of our land flower. The Gilles du Gard, beardless prophet, is a paradigm of that lyrical self-giving. How the face blends with emasculated Abelard's Easter hymn, another paradise recovered. Vera Jerusalem est illa civitas. Jerusalem is the city of everlasting peace. There finds the dreamer waking truth beyond dreaming far, nor is the heart's possessing less than the heart's desire. So too the promise of Leonin's Judea and Jerusalem, twice heard, and now triune.